I'm Scott Hershovitz, and I teach tort law. I'm also a philosopher, so I teach philosophy classes about law, classes like life, death, love and the law, classes about punishment, and then lots of mini seminars that meet in my house. Yeah, so the mini seminars are an opportunity to teach things that wouldn't be part of the regular curriculum, to have a little bit of fun. I taught a class called Baseball in the Law. I taught a class called What's a Good Life and Can a Lawyer Have One? And then my favorite mini seminar of all was called Assholes, Bullshit, and the Law. Yeah, well, so like the animating question is, like, why are so many lawyers assholes, and why is so much of what they say bullshit? And there's actually a lot of philosophy about what assholes are. There was a best-selling book years ago called Assholes, a Theory by a philosopher named Darren James. It was actually a very serious effort to figure out, like, who are these characters and why do they bother us so much? And then I just added an additional question for my class. Why are so many of them lawyers? Is there something about the profession that is inducing the bad behavior that's the butt of so many lawyer jokes? And why is it that, that we teach lawyerly ethics, so many lawyers, right, seem to behave in ways that are unethical, to say things that aren't true, or to speak without regard for the truth, which is the classic philosophical definition of what bullshit is. So we had a lot of fun. We read philosophy and we sort of looked at the ethical rules for lawyers and tried to better understand what it is about being a lawyer that generates so much misbehavior. What's a Good Life and Can a Lawyer Have One was a kind of like general effort to think through like the ethics of living, like what does a good life look like? But then I brought in a lot of lawyers working in different aspects of legal practice to have conversations about their careers and what they thought had gone well and what they wished they'd done differently, and sort of what lessons, reflecting back, they wanted to share with students who were just starting out. My law origin story is probably pretty boring, but it's got two parts. One is my older brother is a lawyer, and I spent most of my childhood, he was 4 years older than me, interested in whatever he was interested in, and he stopped on law. So that may partly explain why I stopped on law. Oh, there was a little more to it, because when I got to undergrad, I accidentally ended up in a philosophy class, and just within an hour, I thought, this is amazing. This is really what I want to do with my life. But there's this quote from an NFL player who had also majored in philosophy. People asked him if he was going to do philosophy after he was done in the NFL, and he said, he looked at them like they were crazy. He's like, you can't open a philosophy factory, which is kind of the thought I had too. I was like, oh, I don't really know if there's much of a career in that. And so I decided that I would go to law school. And it just turns out I feel like I found this kind of loophole in life where I get to do philosophy about law. So I've got a degree, I've got like reason to be here, and nevertheless get to be exploring the kinds of questions that get me really excited. So I clerked twice. I clerked out in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and I clerked for Justice Ginsburg, and then in between I was an attorney at the Justice Department. I worked in the civil division on something called the appellate staff, so handling cases in courts of appeals on behalf of the United States government. And I actually loved that job. It was like the issues were important and the work was really engaging, and I could have gone back to that happily, but Michigan invited me to come teach, and this is one of the few jobs that I would like more than that. Yeah, it was the most demanding job I ever had and one of the most rewarding jobs I ever had. I think in some ways it was the best job I ever had, but it was one I absolutely would never take back because, we worked like 6 or 7 days a week, 10 or 12 hours a day, sometimes more for most of the year. So it was exhausting, but it was a terrific experience, both to be inside the court and to get an appreciation for how the court worked, but also just to work with her. I think most people know her through her work as a justice, but they have sort of forgotten that she was a phenomenal lawyer. In fact, like one of the most successful civil rights lawyers in the history of our country. And so it was really just a terrific learning experience to reason through things with her and to learn to write from her. So I loved it, but would not want to work in that setting again. So I love being in a classroom. I love sharing ideas with students. I love helping them get their careers as lawyers started. I love hearing their ideas. I'm constantly learning from my students. And I like being part of a community in which ideas matter and people have really rigorous, serious conversations, like much more so than you can find in most of the outside world. I teach torts, which is about injuries and accidents, and most of the hypotheticals start in one of two places. They start from my life, right? So like the very first law school exam I ever wrote was about a fireworks show gone completely wrong, and the setting I had in mind was just a few blocks from the law school. There's like a homemade fireworks show that takes place every July 4th in Burns Park, and the first time we were there to watch, we got up afterwards and were folding up our blanket and noticed that there was a little hole that had burned through it, like one of the embers from a firework had fallen on it. And so I built that up into a big exam question. My exam question this year involved a child getting a concussion in a soccer game. I wrote it about a week after our youngest son, Hank, got a concussion in a soccer game. So that's the main place I find them, is just sort of looking around what's going on in my own life. But another place is just sort of like ripped from headlines. So I've used Taylor Swift's lawsuit for being groped as a common hypothetical in my class, and Alec Baldwin's the accidental shooting that he was involved in was also the foundation for a law school exam. But one of my favorite things to do actually in my classes is, like when we're discussing battery, is like I've gone through YouTube and just pulled lots of videos of regular people and celebrities involved in situations that might or might not involve torts. Actually, the YouTube algorithm thinks I have really strange interests. So Nasty British and Short is a book that I wrote about my kids, or actually really about two of my great loves, my kids and philosophy. It's a kind of fast-paced, funny introduction to philosophy seen through the eyes of kids, because the main thesis of the book is that every kid is a philosopher, especially actually little kids, right? They're puzzled by the world and they're trying to puzzle it through. And they say a lot of things that I think to most adults just sound cute, right? But if you're listening with the right ear, they're actually raising really deep puzzles, right? Asking profound questions about the world, some of the same questions and puzzles that philosophers have been pondering for thousands of years. And they're not just asking the questions, they also try to answer them in really clever ways, right? So the book is me telling stories about conversations with my kids, questions they ask, arguments they make, things they do, and then noticing what the deep, interesting philosophical issues are embedded in those questions or conversations and exploring them with my kids. Yeah, so Nasty British and Short was a book for a big audience. I want, all parents, all grandparents, all teachers, people that interact with kids, or people that are just curious about philosophy to read. Law as a Moral Practice is an academic book. It's sort of the culmination of lots of the research and thinking that I've been doing about law. And it's written mostly for an academic audience, although I hope in a way that's sort of like fun and accessible. There are more stories about my kids, so I do think it's open to be read by a wider audience. But the basic argument of the book goes like this. There's a kind of standard picture that a lot of people have about law. They think that we engage in various legal practices, we pass legislation, we sue people in court, and we get judicial opinions, or administrative agencies issue regulations, and they think that that's creating a new kind of what philosophers call a normative system, like a system of rights and responsibilities that's different from the one that we live with every day, like the moral normative system. So we think oh, I've got my moral rights and responsibilities, and then what lawyers do through these legal institutions is they create this alternative system, these legal rights and responsibilities. And then philosophers have asked a lot of questions about that alternative system. How does it relate to morality? Are we obligated to obey the obligations that we've got in this legal normative system? And I think that's absolutely the wrong way to look at this all. So Law as a Moral Practice is pitching a different picture of what we're up to in law. Right? What I think we're up to in our legal practices is we're trying to change our moral relationships in much the same way that we might say change our moral relationships when you make a promise. If I say, hey, Dustin, do you want to have lunch next week, maybe like next Tuesday at noon, and you say yes, well, now we've made a commitment to each other, right? We each have this obligation to be there at a particular time that we didn't have before, right? We've adjusted our moral relationship. I think our legal practices are aiming to do just the same thing, to create genuine moral rights and responsibilities, and I actually think this is part of the explanation of why law is so controversial. Right? Because we actually disagree about morality a lot. So we disagree both about what rights and responsibilities we should create, but sometimes we also disagree about what rights and responsibilities we have created. Right? Like, does the Constitution protect a right to an abortion? It's not something you can just look up. Right? Like, you can see the words of the Constitution, but then we all have to decide what they mean and how they've affected people's rights and responsibilities. So the book is an effort to explain this different way of thinking about the relationship between law and morality. The thing I love most about Michigan law is the people. It's just an extraordinary community. And I think that's like true for a variety of reasons. One is actually I just think like the geography of the place. It's a university town in the Midwest, and there's a kind of self-selection effect to people who think, yeah, I want to spend time in that place. They're super smart, but they also tend to be friendly and collegial, and I think that's a large part of the unique atmosphere. Another part of the geography of the place is that like people's lives are pretty centered around the school because they're not pulled in a million different directions the way they might be if you were living in New York or LA or Chicago. That means like both among students and faculty, people get to know each other really well, and they spend a lot of time together. So you're not just around this extraordinary set of human beings that are super smart and engaged and dedicated and passionate, but you also get to know them really well, and they become important parts of your life.